Good afternoon, parents. I'm holding a quick webinar on diagramming because I know some of you may be a little rusty from your high school days. And since we're doing a lot of diagramming in Class 8 English this year, I thought it might be helpful for you to be refreshed in exactly how to do this so that you can help your students. So I've selected a very complicated sentence. Look with me at the sentence. Because the duck's farouche behavior displeased him, Miles refused to speak to the imaginary mallard for several hours until Mrs. Crowson intervened to make peace between the friends. Obviously kind of a nonsensical sentence, but it gives us a great opportunity to look at some specific things that we've been looking at in class. When you first encounter a sentence that you want to diagram, the very first thing that you should do is to isolate your independent clause, the clause that can stand by itself. In this particular case, that clause is, I'm going to use a different color here. That clause is, Miles refused to speak to the imaginary mallard for several hours. What you have here, because the duck's farouche behavior displeased him, is a dependent clause, and here, until Mrs. Crowson intervened to make peace between the friends, is also a dependent clause. So we will deal with them after we deal with the main clause. After we've isolated the main clause, we want to look for the subject and the verb of the clause. In this particular case, Miles is the subject noun, and refused is the action verb. With an action verb, we want to consider whether or not we have a direct object. And in this case, we do, but it's a little unusual because our direct object here is not a single word, it's actually a phrase. To speak to the imaginary mallard for several hours. All of that is an infinitive phrase that functions as the direct object. So we'll just put that in parentheses, and all of it will label the direct object. To speak is our infinitive. To the imaginary mallard is a prepositional phrase. Your students should know that. And then for several hours is another prepositional phrase. And again, that's not going to be anything new for them. So I'm going to start by diagramming just the independent clause. Miles refused to speak to the imaginary mallard for several hours. And as I've told the students in class, I want them to think through their diagrams so that they can be neat and not jumbled and messy. So I want to be sure to give myself plenty of space for each thing that I'm going to diagram. Since there are no modifiers for Miles, I'll simply put Miles on the main line and then draw a perpendicular line that intersects the main line. And then I'm ready to put my action verb. Again, there are no modifiers. If I had modifiers for either one of these, I would want to make sure that I have plenty of room underneath to put those modifiers in place. But since there are no modifiers in either case, I'm okay just putting my line right after the word because I'm wanting to give plenty of space for my direct object, which is obviously very long. In this particular case, the direct object is all an infinitive phrase, and infinitive phrases, when they are a direct object, are diagrammed above the line on a tree, something like this. My infinitive goes on the slanted line, and then, the to goes on the slanted line, and the verb goes on the horizontal line, to speak. The funny thing about infinitives is that even though this is functioning as a direct object, because it's an infinitive, it can also take a direct object. In this case, I don't have that because I've got two prepositional phrases, and prepositional phrases cannot be direct objects. Both of these prepositional phrases are going to be diagrammed underneath the line of to speak, but above the main line. So to the imaginary mallard, to is my preposition and mallard is my object, and the is a modifier for mallard, as is imaginary. And we find that sometimes our modifiers are going to cross that main line. It's preferable if they don't. And so what I might do is just erase that main line a little bit. But if you can get it to where this is actually far above the line, that's preferable. And then for several hours is diagrammed just the same way. For hours is the object, and then several is the adjective that modifies ours. So here is what my main clause would look like. But obviously that's only about a third of the sentence. I still have this first dependent clause and the second dependent clause to deal with. I want to deal with those dependent clauses in order. So I will diagram this first dependent clause first, and then I'll diagram the second one underneath it. In each clause, I will find a subject and a verb. So that's the first thing I want to look for. The subject here is behavior. It's a subject noun, and the verb is displeased. It's an action verb, so I look for a direct object, in this case, him, which is a pronoun. The, ducks, and farouche are all adjectives that modify behavior. And because is that introductory word, a conjunctive adverb, if you will, that's going to introduce the adverb clause. So I'm going to diagram that just below here. When I diagram a dependent clause that's an adverb clause, I'm going to be connecting verb to verb. So I want displeased to fall right underneath refused. So again, I will draw my main line. Behavior. Now I have three words that are going to modify my subject. So I want to be sure to put those in before I draw that perpendicular line, so that I don't scrunch up my words. So the, ducks, and farouche. And then I can go ahead and draw the perpendicular line. Displeased. There are no modifiers for displeased, so I don't have to worry about the space underneath. Him is my direct object. And then I'm going to connect these two clauses using a dotted line that moves from verb to verb. Because this is an adverb clause, and I put that conjunctive adverb on that dotted line. Notice that I capitalized because, since it is the first word of the sentence. And this is that first dependent clause diagrammed. All I have left now is this last dependent clause, and I follow the same method. This is also an adverb clause, so it looks just like this one that I did just a second ago. The subject noun here is Mrs. Krausen. Verb is intervened. Intervened what? I don't have a direct object. I have a how, to make peace between the friends, or a why. So this, to make peace between the friends, is actually going to be an infinitive phrase that functions as an adverb that modifies intervened. I have my infinitive, to make. To make what? That's my do of the infinitive. And then between the friends is a prepositional phrase. Until is my conjunctive adverb. I'm going to be joining intervened with refused. So I'm going to offset this just a little bit in hopes that I can draw a straight line and not zigzag everywhere. So Mrs. Krausen is going to be way over here, only for that purpose. If I wanted to diagram this directly underneath, I could, but it's going to require a zigzag line, which I don't really like. I don't have any modifiers for Mrs. Krausen, so no need to worry about the space there. Intervened is my action verb. And to make peace between the friends is all going underneath the line here. To make is diagrammed just like a prepositional phrase would be, but it's an infinitive phrase instead, which means that it can take a do, peace, and that would be diagrammed like any other do, that perpendicular line that stops at the main line. And between the friends is going to describe peace. What kind of peace, or which peace between the friends. So that will be diagrammed underneath peace. And then the only thing I have left is until, which is going to go on a dotted line, just like because did. I'm going to connect refused to intervened, and put that word on that line. So there I have a sentence with a main clause and two adverb clauses as dependent clauses Hopefully this helps.